Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we are discussing a key topic that pertains to all of us, which is political education, and not so much the actual career development in relation to political science, for example, but just the sheer interest that we can always consider, or that we should have always considered to implement as part of our day-to-day living, becoming aware of how our economic systems, political systems operate, what kind of political structure are we living in, and so also discerning whether it is in fact being lived as it's said on paper, so to speak, or not, and also considering how we could actually participate in it. Because we've also many times talked about the solutions that we can implement, but we've also seen that most of the problems that we have as human beings, it's precisely the lack of interest in relation to becoming politically interested, politically aware of the problems, the solutions that we can actually implement as people of this world, in this world. And so today we have a hangout, and we had initially planned to discuss with Barbara Stangl, and she's not online yet, and there's some technical issues. That's why we also came up a little bit late. And we also have Josh Richert from the US. Hi, Josh.
Hi.
And so let's start with you and share with us how has in your case, in contrast to Barbara's situation, you've always had like this natural tendency to be interested in politics. Why is this?
Well, I haven't had a natural tendency to be involved or to be interested in politics to where I personally want to participate in them, but more or less from like I want to understand what's going on. And it's been more or less at a national or a world level rather than a local level So, and to me it seems that politics and money are at that level, at the world level, are tied to each other like almost interchangeably. And so it's just very interesting. I've been doing research on how things work between money and politics for years now, and it's just a fascinating study.
And why do you consider that this is also important? Because we know of many people, many of us have relied on only what we get to hear from the news maybe, or what we get in school. From your position, is that sufficient to become politically aware of how things really work?
No, absolutely not. To become aware of how things really work, from my experience, is really to know how the money system works. Because behind everything that you see in politics, ultimately you have a financial reason, and it's not just about making money, but it's about the control of resources or territories or countries or nations of people in order to stabilize currencies and ultimately assess and amass wealth to a concentrated few. It's basically a game that's being played behind the scenes. And so the understanding of money is key to seeing how that all works.
Yes, I agree with that, because when we, for example, in school, we get to know that, yes, there is a government and they take care of it all, and from there you don't really get to know how really the banking system operates, for example, or what really goes on in systems like Wall Street, or how is your actual money valued upon, or what is it backed with. And this is also what goes hand in hand with us as people of the world just creating another belief system of, for example, what the political system is or what the government should do. So what's your understanding at this stage in relation to, let's say, in the case of the US, which is quite a great example, in terms of the political system as a representative democracy and how it actually operates?
Okay, well, the political system in the U.S. does represent a group of people. However, the interesting thing is it actually doesn't represent the people of the United States. It represents the people that have control of the money system that exists within the United States, and the entities that have grown up around that group, specifically the banking system and international corporations like oil companies and defense contractors, so on and so forth, they are represented by Congress and the presidency, and the people are represented only to the point where the people actually make noise enough to have to be dealt with, you know, by the government. And that power transfer has occurred over time through the money system. The money system being the debt fiat-based currency system that we operate under, where money is issued at the exchange for debt, or all money comes into existence through debt, and the control and value of that money is controlled by the central bank. And so we really need to know and understand their motives and what they're trying to achieve and their objectives to really understand what's going on worldwide.
So in terms of that, because all of that is so well hidden right now, not so much due to the internet, and we have great documentaries, great tools to educate ourselves, but this is something that certainly what you just explained doesn't come in your textbooks about politics or economy 101 in schools or anything like that. So how have you come to educate yourself this way and to get to know these facts?
I've done extensive reading on the internet, which is a wonderful means of communication because it's the last bastion of free press, so to speak, where of course there's plenty of misinformation and disinformation on the internet. You have to be able to sort through it, but within that, there's gems of true knowledge about how things work within there. And I've been investigating this for decades, or not decades, for a full decade. And I tend to follow the metals, actually. The guys that write about the metals tend to have a very good understanding of the economy, the banking system, how it actually works. And coincidentally, it goes into international affairs and what's going on behind the scenes, and there's like a war in Syria or Ukraine or whatever's going on, what's really going on there, which is always about, at least in the last 60 years, it's about stabilizing the U.S. dollar and keeping the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency nationwide, forcing the use of the dollar as to settle international trade, specifically with oil through the OPEC system. The entire world economy and world affairs is based on defending the dollar. And yes.
And that's what I would also say is what really shapes political administration and political structure at the moment. It's not really that we have some kind of pure governmental structure where people actually have the power to decide on social matters and how even money operates or how our education systems operate. So with everything that you've just explained, we can also agree that the political notion is actually tainted entirely by the actual economic matters, which means that which we don't learn in school, that which we are not usually being broadcasted by, our media or our general education in schools and so forth. All of that is precisely what becomes the real source of the problem in itself, in terms of how democracy, for example, is really non-existent, and at a political level, we are made believe that, yes, you live in a representative democracy. You can call your congressman and you can just decide on matters that, create or destroy your life. But how have you found out that this is really not so, or what have you found out about the political aspect of this?
Well, one of the big things that it makes it clear to me that the system's not representing us is that no matter who's in office, we all seem to be on the same track, really, universally. And our personal situation down here in the regular land, it continues to deteriorate. So it's as if there's actually no solution to anything. And like you said, there's plenty of solutions that we could come up with to healthcare, education, crime, so on and so forth, that just simply get worse, regardless of the input we put in or the efforts we put in or who we elect. It's always basically the same track that we're on. And the track right now is the wealth, the increasing of the wealth of the elite, corporations and the banks that run international affairs. So I can see that there's absolutely going to be no change with what's going on in this world, and no improvement with our own situations here until we address the money system first, or at least in concert with whatever else we're doing. The money system has to be addressed.
Yeah, what we also say is that through understanding that flawed system at a money system aspect, we also then have to look at how we have all legitimized this system in itself as it is right now, such as through the political apparatus, wherein we have this idea or notion that through voting we will get people in power and so forth. We have a question from Anna, and she's saying, "Hi Josh, what do you mean by following the guys that has the metal?"
Oh, not the guys that own the metals, but the guys that write about the metals, the precious metals, silver and gold, and all that kind of stuff. Those guys have there's two different philosophies in economics, and there's Keynesian economics, which is what the current, that's what's basically, that philosophy is running the system now, which is prosperity through debt. And then there's Austrian economics, which is, prosperity through saving and doing things correctly and not going into debt, like the complete reverse. And the metal guys operate from that Austrian perspective, and they look at everything through that Austrian perspective lens and come up with amazing critiques of how things are actually going on internationally and with money and the money system itself. Perhaps their solution wouldn't be adequate in the long run, but it is as far as their what they write about, it's a great way to learn about how the system works. Like, there's no other source of information like from those guys.
Cool. And in essence, also, when it comes to seeing how all of this is working at a background level, meaning we are generally not aware of even an option on how to run things differently. So that's why also within the context of the living income guaranteed, what we are doing is, first of all, taking the first steps that are required in order to become aware of how things are really operating, that it's not the way that we are usually thinking it would be. And that implies also when it comes to, for example, the banking system and how money is issued and so forth. That's certainly something that before we even get to that, we have to kind of first understand how, due to our abdication of responsibility, our abdication of participation in political affairs, we have allowed just a few individuals to actually run the whole show in terms of how money is issued. For example, the Federal Reserve in the US, so it's a private institution that is the one that runs the show in the United States, and how the government, in this case, the political aspect, is only the facade that has become the way to tell to the people, to legitimize such powers just by, in this case, the cognitive dissonance of saying the Federal Reserve, it's something of the government. And so within all of this, we see that because we have not we haven't become aware, or we haven't studied, or we haven't done proper research, then that also becomes part of the problem in itself. How we are run by a few individuals in this case, but how we have also allowed that, because we haven't, in the majority, I bet you can see that as well, we haven't been interested in that. We have a question from Jean, and she's saying, can you articulate the difference between the Keynesian and versus the Austrian school? I guess you did, but if you can repeat it, please.
Yeah, okay. I'm a little bit rough on this part because I haven't refreshed on that point exactly. But Keynesian, or before this video here, but Keynesian economics would be more or less a belief in the system that we have now, where you have prosperity through debt. There's actually, an economic philosophy that we can spend our way out of our current financial situation that the deficits that we're running are actually good for the economy. It's actually mind-blowing, but there are actually economists that actually believe in running trillion-dollar deficits. They think that in the long run things will work out. And it's all based on the principle that if you just spend the money no matter where it comes from, that eventually you'll create a prosperity boom, which in and of itself could actually manifest. But the problem is the money's all tied to debt. So for all the prosperity that we're having to pay it all back with, actually the net effect would be a reduction in our spending power in the future. That is the same thing as a tax to pay back the debt that we're accumulating through the Keynesian economic philosophy. And the Austrian philosophy would be on the far extreme of that, which would be no debt at all, and everything would be run. Of course, this is all based on a profit-based system as well, but businesses would be free to take care of themselves with no government intervention and no government spending programs to help stimulate the economy. Everything would be run strictly from just a sense of profit and loss, and that would be with no debt tied to the money. That would be an Austrian economic starting point, which is actually where we were before the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913. And ironically, what you're saying about the education, we're not educated about how these things work. We've had two central banks before in the 1800s for 20 years each time, and the government, our government, actually shut them down and went back to the way the Constitution's actually written, where Congress has power of the purse, which is power over money, and the government, if it needs money, can issue it debt-free. Nobody's even aware of the fact that we've actually had debt-free money before this period in time. So, not to merge a bunch of points in here, but just in principle, Austrian economics would be a debt-free system. Keynesian economics, ironically, would be prosperity through debt.
It's the entire sacrifice for the economic growth. We hear always this term, economic growth, and we don't actually understand where is that coming from. And the United States is actually running from that because it's the most indebted nation throughout history, and it's the most powerful at the same time. So it's actually a bubble that will eventually burst. So what's your perspective in terms of this condition from the perception of, well, I am an individual, for example, in the United States, and I know that my government is probably not in the best stance that it is, but I am really not able to do something about it, or I am powerless to go and change things. Or what have you also seen around you in terms of people, or are they even aware of this? Are they interested? Or do they, or do we as people in the world know that this is actually absolutely like a fallacious system, and we just keep it running because it gives us our benefit, it works for our lives? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think it was Plato who said an apathetic populace will have evil rulers, and I think we're proving that right now. And also, that is what I see is mainly it's apathy. For instance, I've tried to tell people that the Federal Reserve Bank is a private institution, and just getting that across is a monumental task for the average individual. They'll, without even investigating that point, they'll just write you off or say it's not possible, or that's, there's got to be something missing from the equation, and so you wind up just giving up. But the fact is that they are a privately held corporation. That's how they're set up, and that in and of itself is actually a criminal conspiracy, because nobody actually knows of this. That means that the entire federal government is not telling you, plus the media is not telling you, plus your schools aren't telling you. I mean, to have a private bank running your finances, which is unconstitutional, is a criminal conspiracy and proves criminal conspiracy. But the people of the United States just don't even care to even investigate that one point. If they can just investigate that one point and prove that, they can at least begin to see, well, okay, this is a criminal conspiracy. What else? Let's start investigating the rest of this. But we can't even get that far for some reason. And so as far as, making change, somehow or another, people are going to have to start waking up to the system to see it for what it actually is, and then we can begin to talk about how we're going to actually change it.
That's the whole point, and thank you for articulating that, because I've also seen that. I mean, I even, spoke about this with my father, and he had no idea of how things are run, for example, in the US, and I could only see that his disbelief, like he couldn't believe what I was actually explaining to him, but it ends there, it is like a sense of powerlessness that comes through when people get to understand this, and I've been there myself, you've probably been there yourself, but from there, we actually realize that even if I'm not in the States, I'm in Mexico, I'm interested in how things are running in the countries that are placing examples for the rest of the countries, and also considering that we tend to, as people, just get into this disbelief, disempowerment, and believe that we cannot change things. But that's precisely what we get also through the media, through what our idea of politics, which is just let's say the reality show that pretends to have control over things, but as you've explained throughout this hangout, it's not really how things operate. And so how can you then see the potential of people getting to this information beyond the internet? How would you create solutions in a way to precisely get people informed about not only, for example, the Federal Reserve or how the money is operating, but to get people interested into politics, into getting to know economics?
I think that probably the best way to do it would be to have as many of these type of broadcasts as possible, where hopefully we can pique the interests of people so that they can naturally, of their own, start investigating these things. And the more different types of people they hear saying basically the same information in different ways, the more people we can reach. But as far as waking up the populace, there's no real point in doing it on an individual level. I mean, you can bring it up on conversation, but you're not going to have an effect because of the massive resistance. The best thing you can do is organize and already start forming a solution, start forming proposals for a new solution, a new way of doing things, and increase the visualness of it, the publicity of it, to a point where you're reaching some form of a mass awareness, where people are at least aware that this alternative thinking exists, and then from there, hopefully, it grows.
Actually, this is what we are doing with the Living Income Guaranteed, exactly that. And for example, today we got an email from someone in New York. So I think, Jean, you're in New York, so we will contact you because they're interested in working this and already talking through it at a political level. And this is how it's done. We place the information, we place the proposal, such as the Living Income Guaranteed proposal, which is the first step to precisely not getting fully into changing how the money system operates, because those steps will come further. But at the moment, kind of giving that first initial support that we require to give to people to get out of that survival system of living day by day in fear, and precisely through that fear, not being able to even think of solutions, not even having the time to do proper research, to educate themselves. So I also see that as a fundamental first step, because as long as there's people that do see the problem, they live the problem, they understand the flaw of the problem, but they are not allowed to even be able to articulate the problem because they don't know how things operate. They are silenced, the people that have no money, for example, that live in poverty, that are homeless. So through empowering people to the level of dignity, through time, and providing more education like this, and there's many people around the world now providing information through the internet and having the time for that instead of living in that survival mode, then that provision of a living income can certainly grant these, in essence, the space, the time to begin becoming aware of the problem and creating solutions, joining forces, because as you say, it won't come as an isolated thing. And we have a comment from Jean, this is also from what we were just discussing. She said, the setup of the Fed was not an isolated event, but rather a worldwide agenda of debt creation, World Bank, etc. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. The Fed is one of many central banks around the world, and they are all headed up by the Bank of International Settlements, which is like the Federal Reserve Bank of Reserve Banks for the nations. And they're also in tandem with the International Monetary Fund. They all work together in indebting and impoverishing the nations of the world. And once you're in debt, you're basically a slave to the lender. That's the whole principle that they run by. Some of the nations that have the biggest problem in the international arena, such as like Iran, for instance, actually do not have a central bank. So there's a lot of that as the actual reason of what's going on there, or at least a big part of it.
Yes, and the reason for the interventions and to bring democracy at this moment has become just that excuse to precisely implement the same kind of banking system that the rest of the nations that are belonging to the IMF and so forth and World Bank, they are all just one big plot in essence that if certain countries do not comply, then that becomes a reason to go there and disrupt the society, create war, so that eventually, as a form of getting people back up or back on track, now this implementation or joining in a forced manner to this system is what essentially happens. And as you were saying, Iran is one example, and in essence, that's what happened with Libya as well. And we can go also at length explaining that aspect, but I would like to also bring it back to what people can relate to, because consumerism is a great thing, a great deal in America, for example. And we usually, when we consider, buying something in a supermarket, we don't even know where it comes from or what kind of trade deals does this banana is coming to my supermarket and how that operates. So what would you say, or what do you have to comment on this aspect of, let's say, the colonialism or the imperialism that we've also gone through, and that we call it like in the form of trade agreements, like the trade agreement with Latin America or the trade agreement with Mexico and Canada and so forth, or with Africa as well, and that goes under the banner of free trade or fair trade, that it's actually just getting people into debt and getting all the resources and coming back here to the West world and selling it nicely. So what's your take on that?
On the trade agreements with countries, or?
Yes, like becoming aware of how the actual nitty-gritty deals that go behind what we just get as a certain product, and how we as people usually just buy it but aren't even aware of how it came to this country, what kind of agreements were made. Is there a fair trade agreement? Are people being paid sufficiently? And how that operates, or how that goes behind the scenes, so to speak.
Well, we have been programmed like rats on a wheel chasing a piece of cheese for the last 60 years by television to become mindless consumers, wherein we find our happiness within the amount of products and the quality of products and the type of products that we can buy. And as long as we're able to buy those products, we've been programmed to believe that that's what happiness is. That's even the pursuit of happiness. And as long as we're able to play that game, then we really don't want to look at anything. We just want to continue on with our lives until the bitter end, no matter what happens or what's happening around us. And in the meantime, we have all these trade agreements going on, worldwide, that are set up for basically the control of the resources and the price of the resources, and within such as like the North American Free Trade Agreement and so on and so forth, that really have nothing to do with us. That actually might decrease the price of products temporarily in the short run, but in the long run, it's not necessarily so, and people are suffering at some end of the equation that are actually producing the products, all of which really doesn't matter to anybody because we're not actually seeing it happen. We're kind of one step removed from it. And you know, what's going to happen eventually is what's happening now is basically a form of wage arbitrage where, you know, wages are coming under attack, and you know, living standards are going down for everyone. So we all need to wake up soon and start forming real trade agreements, equality and common sense, where, you know, maybe we try to like stay more local and trade with each other in our local regions instead of all this international stuff. Maybe just keep as a rule of thumb that international trade maybe is not a good idea because there's somebody way at the top benefiting from it. Maybe we need to focus more locally and change our priorities as far as our buying habits and spending habits and what's important to us.
Yes, the reason why I bring that up is because when we only tend to focus on our self-interest, which is just satisfying our basic needs, we tend to only see the product, we eat it, we consume it, we buy it, and we dispose it, but we don't even get to become aware of, okay, how did this get to my table? How did this get to my Walmart? What are the relationships that are going on there, and how that is also essentially handled or managed through politics. We don't even get to understand that because we are not taught about it. So we have to kind of begin realizing that politics is also, and economics is not something isolated from, you know, only people that are living in Wall Street or people that are in Washington in your case. But it's actually something that we deal with every single day. The same with the kind of education that you have. In essence, everything that manages our lives is within this structure, as you were saying, yes, within this kind of experiment of living within a survival mode in a structure that has been planned to precisely not support everyone. And that's why, in a dignified manner, of course. So that's why we're also proposing the living income guaranteed as a first point, as a model that can tap into the political flaws, the economic flaws, and create solutions that are not way out there or that we require a lot of time, but it begins with things that are already happening in the US, like making wages or the minimum wage higher. In Seattle, for example, that's already happening. It's going to be a process of 3 years, for example, for some businesses, but getting to a $15 wage, minimum wage. And that comes from people that get into politics. Shama Savant is the one that has done that. So when I read that kind of news in terms of people getting into politics and really going for one point and getting it done, it does create that sense of awareness that the problem is not really out there, and it will begin by simple points like this one, but more so than all of this that also still happens at the political level from person to person. So in terms of this, in your case, how could you see as a solution that you can suggest to people, for example, that we begin this process of self-education? You mentioned before the internet studies, but there's a lot of information. Can you recommend actual sources or places or forums, etc.?
Well, globalresearch.ca is a great website. I frequent quite a bit. And another one would be Silver Doctors, which I find to be very informative. And then, like I said before, you know, I think there's a lot of self-education that needs to be done where people really begin to understand how the system works, that can then join forces and make videos and spread the word so that, you know, we can reach more people, and then simultaneously have a proposal like the living income guarantee, which is a great platform to run on, because essentially what that is a form of a bailout. It's a negative word, but it really essentially is for the people, which that's really where the money is needed. And an interesting point on that is that a lot of people don't believe that we have the money for a bailout. Like, you can't, you know, just spend whatever it costs to, not a bailout, but for the living income guarantee, like as if, you know, we can't afford to spend the money there. But we're already doing a bailout. We're bailing out the financial institutions at the tune of trillions of dollars per year. So we've already got the money. We're just misdirecting it. We need to direct it into the hands of the people that need it, and that'll actually stimulate the economy, because there'll be more people buying their basic needs at a higher rate, because they'll be buying what they actually need instead of only what they can afford. and that money will come back into the system, and it can be recycled in essence. Whereas the bailouts that they have now for the banks to go right straight into the commodities, food prices, and cause inflation because the banks are just investing it. They're speculating with the money. They're not even putting it into the economy. So we have a worse situation now. I mean, if we just simply redirected all that money that we're using to bail out the elite and formed it into a living income guarantee, and it went from the bottom up, the economy would improve dramatically, and we'd have much better results with less money. And actually, everybody would win. even the winners in this system would.
Of course. Exactly. That's what we're saying all this time as well, that, there's people, even in politics, I read the news today, they would say that that would create a massive loss, augmenting the minimum wage, which is really a brain-dead comment without realizing that that money would actually go to the people to expand the consumer base and to essentially revive the economy that is currently being revived through the use of military excuses to wage war onto other countries, only causing death and destruction. I mean, I'm really flabbergasted at how this war on Afghanistan is costing billions and billions of dollars just to now retreat from there and get the troops back. I mean, all that money, if you could invest it instead into providing a living income, America would not be simply plunging into poverty, homelessness that is now being criminalized there. And even, I mean, the idea of Obama, for example, raising the minimum wage to $10.10, it's really laughable because it could be a lot more than that, and it would be a beneficial thing for everyone. So with all of this, I could say that I agree with how we have lived in this limited view of the system where we believe that we have to conform with the little bits of changes, but there is money, and so we simply have to decide and agree to mobilize ourselves to essentially create political parties, political groups, wherein these issues can be discussed and laid out in terms of solutions. Because, I mean, if people from the US are contacting us saying that they're interested in this, it means that it's doable. It's a matter of, sharing these kind of videos as well, sharing the proposal, sharing information on how we aren't really disempowered to change things. And this video will also stay as a proof of that. So we had a question from Gabriel, but we also already kind of said, which articles, material, books, and so on would you suggest to the people to read or check to be able to educate themselves? You were saying about the websites. Maybe you can also write them out, and we can place them in the information of the video later on.
Yeah, I'll do that. There's plenty of other sources too.
Okay, so Josh, to finish off, because this is a living income guaranteed proposal, hangout, what, in your perspective, you already mentioned the benefits, what else have you seen would be like a paradigm shift situation with it? What are the benefits?
Of the living income proposal?
Yes.
Okay. Well, as I've just outlined, in addition to that, it would just redirect the funds into the, to people that need it, and alleviate an enormous amount of stress that's caused by the lack of money. I mean, I know in my own life, within my own occupation, if you could take the money out of the question of whether there will be money at the end of the rainbow out of the equation, that'll change the way I conduct myself in business. I try to not let it affect me or change me, but it's always back there as an underlying, undercurrent of, somewhat directing me in my actions within, how I conduct myself in business. And sometimes it's good and sometimes that's bad. Like sometimes I know I need to do something a certain way because in order for the best outcome, but because I might lose the customer, which means I'll lose money, I will cave and go out and do it the customer's way to try to make them happy on the short run. And if I didn't have income to worry about, I would just tell them, no, this is how we're going to do it. This is the right way to do it, and this is how it's going to be done. So I think it would change the way we actually work with ourselves and each other. Also, things will be dramatically improved if people will be able to stand up for what's right and what's best for all, or best for their business at least, much more so than they can now, where they have the fear or threat of loss of income as a consequence if they don't do what they believe they actually need to do. And so we would have a lot of benefits on that level as well.
I agree absolutely, and that's a very crucial aspect because when we look precisely at the word economy, politics, we tend to see it out there, but you're just sharing your own example as a businessman, how that will affect the decisions that you make. And that's precisely the kind of decisions that create the actual fabric of society, the actual fabric nature of the system in itself, where we won't compromise each other and do things that we know aren't best for everyone, that want, for example, selling something that won't last that much, but I require the money, so I have to get it done somehow. And so we will stop kind of leading our lives through that sheer necessity of the money, of getting day by day, getting the money to eat, getting the money for basic necessities, or existing in that complete fear of poverty and not being able to feed your children and, you know, having some stability in your life, which has become also a source of sickness, illnesses, mental diseases that also become another aspect that would be actually diminished, if not completely cleared up, or a healing process that would come with that stability that comes with money. I mean, I can see it with people in my environment, myself. When we don't have money, it's like your entire experience simply goes down. You get depressed, you get annoyed, you get angry, you don't know what to do. And if we could provide that stability to everyone, it is really like the empowerment that we haven't seen before as a genuine form of democracy, because it's not really just going and voting, but getting the money to be able to participate effectively in the economy, in essence, as you're mentioning, and so with decision-making processes, which is essentially what politics implies. So thanks for sharing that as well. And so we're about to finish. Any last words that you have?
Well, you know, just after going through this interview here, I think that the best way to make change on this front here would be to do what we're doing here, and also challenge the mindsets of people that have been conditioned. We have a lot of conditioned mindsets about a lot of things on various topics. You know, even the situation in the Ukraine, I find a lot of people out here are still believing that we're facing the USSR. We're not. We're facing Russia. It's a totally different country than it was 60 years ago. And, you know, but that's just one example. I mean, there's dozens and dozens. So we should probably take time to take apart all of these conditioned beliefs about how the system works, about how money works, the international countries, who they are in reality, on the international field, so that we can begin to see things for what they are. And then while we're doing that, also run a very strong campaign or proposal for a living income guarantee that eventually will hopefully get into the minds of people enough to actually make an electable candidate that can enter into politics and actually start to affect some change.
Yeah, exactly. And also considering that living income is an entire change, not only in just giving money to people, but there are changes that are required, as we were mentioning, in the banking system, nationalizing resources, redirecting military funds in the case of the US, which would mean stopping war effectively, and many other aspects that have to do also with what media would broadcast, what kind of products, what kind of businesses would be opened and supported, because it's about time that we stop also the production of things just for the sake of profit. And also that comes with the decision to support things that will support me as an individual and support my society back. So that community aspect that you were mentioning, that local support, I consider it also important to emphasize here, because the more that we also get in touch with our neighbors, our community, which is virtually lost at this stage, the more we can then begin establish that first point of communication of talking about these things, because we usually only live in this very facade way of things, as you were saying, like we are mind controlled in essence, to just live in this status quo that we've called our human nature, or this is how the world system is. But we're seeing that that is going down the river, meaning it's going down to destruction, it's going down to not having any form of sustainability or even a foreseeable stable future, which is really concerning at the moment. So it's about time that we stop our apathy, as you were mentioning in the beginning, and start getting together. This is a space for that. So anyone that wants to participate here, you can contact us as well. We are more than happy to establish these kind of dialogues, and I thank you, Josh, for sharing with us, because it's been very cool to understand how we can talk about politics in the sense of, okay, what is a representative democracy and so forth, but you've simply brought it down to what is really kind of moving the cogwheels in the system, which is the entire financing system, the banking system, and also the aspects that we all live at an individual level that prevent us from getting into that. So thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you.
And it would be cool if you can come back maybe with some other topics that you'd like to explain at length in these little aspects that you just mentioned throughout the Hangout to expand further and to continue opening up the dialogue. And thanks for being here, for your time, and thanks to anyone that also everyone that placed comments and questions. And we'll see you guys next time. Maybe a little, maybe an hour before the usual time. So we'll let you guys know. So stay tuned with us. Thanks for watching. Bye, Josh.
Right. Thank you.